I guess let's just start because, I mean, the original film came out 2011, is that right? I'm sorry, Mother came out in the woman came out in 2011. So at what point after that did this idea start to come about and you wanted to sort of follow it up?
I mean, I guess that's really, our producer Andrew Vandenhat came to me quite a few years later. Is it on?
You guys here? That's right.
Thank you. This one's on. It was a couple of years before we made Darlin that he came to me with the idea of me directing a sequel. But I don't know if you guys had discussed it before that. I mean, it was always like we knew that the woman was going to have a sequel at some point, right?
Period of time in like 2015, I think. Is that when you started working on it?
No,
2014?
No, it was much later. It was like 16 or 17.
Was it?
I'm really good with dates.
She's making that up.
No, it was much later because I was shooting Half a Leonard, so it was, yeah.
Was it 15? Yeah, I thought it was summer of 15.
Maybe.
Maybe 16. I don't know. Doesn't matter. But the idea of a sequel came up, and Ketchum and I both were just not interested. He had written 3, he co-wrote the 3rd novel with me, but he had written 2 previous novels in that world. And after making The Woman, we were both kind of like cannibaled out.
Yeah.
But Van Houten still, he had made 2 films, and he wanted to make a 3rd film, and he was looking at some different people as a possibility, and I was like, did you ever think about asking Polly?
Did you ask her to ask me to direct?
Yeah, I did.
That's the first time I'm hearing this.
Yeah. Because you just made a short film around that time, and I was like, okay, Polly wants to get into this. This is amazing. And who knows the character better than the lady that played her?
You convinced him to let me write it, but I didn't know you'd sort of started the whole thing. So thanks.
Well.
So where did the ideas for what you ended up writing? Were there some already in place? I mean, it obviously is like the angry passion is still there from before, but I'm just wondering, like, the specific story about taking it into this new realm with this new younger character.
The only sequel possibility that I had read was from Ketchum himself, which was The Cow, which.
Yeah, we wrote a follow-up, like a little short story.
But you weren't working on The Cow.
Yeah, I wrote it with
him.
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay.
It was basically the reason we wrote The Cow is because the Woman novel was considered kind of bordering on novella length, so they wanted something to kind of pad out the end of the paperback that we put out.
Oh, okay.
So we wrote this weird little follow-up story with Darlin and the crew that walked away at the end of The Woman.
Yeah, and that reference to character from Offspring, which come before The Woman. So the only thing I'd seen was that, and it was quite sexual, and I wasn't that into doing it.
Yeah,
because
it was
you guys
never
had written it to fulfill.
it was never
supposed
intended to be
filmed.
like a movie sequel.
And for me, when it's suggested to me as a sequel anyway, it was like, I don't know, but it wasn't like I kiboshed it and it was over. It was just sort of this thing that came up and then sort of disappeared again, and probably because Andrew realised it wasn't a feature-length movie and it wasn't something that could happen.
Yeah, it was just a weird little like epilogue oddity. Sort of.
Yeah, and it felt good for that, but it didn't feel like the sequel. Anyway, years later, he came to Andrew, as we were saying, the producer came to me and said, "Would you direct it?" Because you guys had that conversation. And when I wanted to write it and look into, I started researching ideas of feral children, and I read this story about this priest in India who's a Western priest working over there, doing kind of conversion over there, as I assumed. And he had apparently found these 2 feral girls in the woods, and he was bringing them to the church and saying, well, it was just basically, it was a little thing on Wikipedia, anyone can find it. It was like a priest in India who was Western had found these 2 feral girls, sisters, and exposed them, and brought them to the press. And I thought, and then it turned out that they were actually just had special needs and couldn't speak. And the speech thing wasn't in there, but it was that they had special needs, and that's why they were acting in this way that people perceived as animalistic and as feral. And so I thought, well, why did this priest do this? It was either for money or for fame, for either himself or for the church, and that was kind of the seed of the idea. And then I liked the concept of Darlin being pregnant because, Peggy had left the end of The Woman pregnant, and I thought, why would the woman bring her into civilization? Like, we need her out of the woods, we need her in a new environment, but why would that happen? And I just thought, well, if she's pregnant, that would make sense, that she was coming to a hospital to ensure that, you know, what happened to Peggy in the woods didn't happen to her. I didn't want to go with Peggy. I didn't want Peggy with the Cleek baby and all of that, and I wanted a young one who was innocent. I wanted a young one. And I wanted something different.
Magic happened
Yeah.
at the end of the woman too. We filmed that last scene of the
Yeah.
woman. There was like this, I don't know, like this little piece of magic that happened between
Yeah.
you and that little girl.
Totally.
You know?
And it was like Darlin was the most positive, joyful, innocent, unjudgmental. She was a lot of the heart of the woman, you know, with her little radio and playing music for the woman, and she was caring and empathetic. And I wanted to take this kid who'd been through all these horrors already and see what she brought to the fore of the story, you know, as a teenager. And I also was very interested in dealing with a girl at that age where she's beginning to explore her own sexuality, and it's hers, and she's having personal experiences. And I certainly found this, and I think a lot of women find this, like when I started to develop into what looked more like a woman than a child, but I was still figuring out what that meant for me, I was suddenly like, I felt naked. I just felt like everybody was noticing and looking at me, and I was sexualized in this way, and I was judged in this way by you know, my own, is anyone filming this? You know, by my own mother. Like, there was this kind of different way I was being treated, and then by the men, and you know, adults and young men alike. It was just like, boob alert, you know? It was just like this very different experience I was having of the world, and so I was very interested in kind of that stage of life and how she might experience that even more full-blown, because she didn't have the reference of society or any way to cope within this society that we've created. And then I also read a statistic that 1 in 6 Americans are treated in a hospital that's run by a Catholic health organization without knowing that they're in a hospital that has different rules from, you know, the other hospitals they might have inspected. So you're in there looking for help, and you are being kind of controlled by this religious organization when it's not what you came in for. So, you know, all those things combined, the separation of church and state, which we kind of uphold as a very American belief, and yet I don't really believe that's what we're doing, and so that interested me.
I liked that there were some more serious themes here, but there are also just some nice moments where the girls are just interacting and like talking, and I like those interactions because I feel like we get to know them, care about them a little bit, and it has nothing to do with forwarding the story. It's just spending time with them. And then there's also humor here, and sometimes it goes really fast from humor to something really violent, which is not unlike what you did in your film, but
Yeah, but Polly brought a different flavor
It's
too.
true, it's
We
totally
were talking
different.
about that earlier this morning. I mean, like, by the time you get to like the scene of like the woman taking her first car ride, it's like I was like, oh my god! I saw like an early cut of it on the set, and I was just like, this is fucking hilarious. It's like so absurd. It's like she just like turned it up to 11 all of a sudden, and it was just like so shocking. I adore the sense of humor that she brought to it.
was it scary to work in so many tones though, like within one film?
I think it was scary for the funders. It was so
It's
much.
also Polly's first movie too.
That's
So
what I
she's
mean,
like, she's like trying shit. You know what I mean? Like there's this like experimental nature to everything that she's doing in there. That's just, I don't know. Like that's what I look for in movies. You know, it's so exciting.
Thanks. I mean, I find life completely absurd and horrific and joyful all at the same time. And so for me, any story that I was going to tell with horror in it had to have absurdity too, because it's also a way for me into those characters and for people to connect with them and care about them, in order that the horror is more horrific, but also that they are just invested, you know, talking about you guys. And yeah, for me, a mix of genres isn't, I mean, I'm a big John Waters fan, you know, and then I'm a big Polanski fan. So, you know, this is my version of horror.
What was it like for you just to put that face back on to play that character? I mean, it's just in a few moments, but what is it? What is that like for you? Is it fun? Is it traumatic? Is it? What does it bring back?
It's when I'm already going into when you're rather than when I'm, but when I'm in that role, when I'm in any role, I'm fully in it. And that's fun and exciting. I mean, people talk about doing the woman, and they often ask me, was it horribly traumatic to do? But you're very intensely in it, and you also kind of know you're getting it, because I knew you were getting it.
Yeah.
So there's a satisfaction in that, and so the horror doesn't feel traumatic because your mood is elevated by knowing that it's working. And also the woman wasn't like us going, why are you doing this to me? She was like a shark in the water going, how do I get out? How do I get off this hook I'm on? How do I succeed? And how do I fight back? So playing her, there's a certain strength in it, in that she is absolutely going to take care of business,
Clearly Lauren studied you too.
Yeah.
Studied what you did and did her own thing, but I could see these echoes.
Yeah.
And what you had established in Offspring and the woman, and then just seeing that transfer to her, because she carries this movie.
Yeah, totally.
It was pretty neat to see that torch get passed.
Fun, right?
To her.
Yeah. That was a wonderful experience working with
And
Lauren.
man, I just gotta say, it just it hits me every time I watch it. The scenes where she's in the office with the bishop and she trusts him, and he's just fucking manipulating her and using her trust and her innocence against her just breaks my fucking heart, because our world is full of that, especially now, and it's just so beautiful the way you captured that. It hurts to watch, Yeah, that's the point, It's that's you saying as an artist, I see this, you know what I mean? And you're sharing that with everybody else, and that's, I don't know, it's a beautiful thing.
Sorry, before you do, a wonderful man, Barry Crimmins, who's a great comedian.
I was going to ask you about that. I saw his name in the credits. I'm like, I wonder why that's in there.
Yeah, there was a wonderful documentary that Bobcat Goldthwait made about Barry Crimmins called Call Me Lucky.
Played it at this theater with Barry
Oh,
and Bobcat Gary at another festival.
That's
a couple
great.
years ago.
That's great. So I'm in that movie at the very end.
Are you really?
In the friends room around Barry, around the table, when we were all celebrating him. I was in that. I was lucky enough to be on the road for that movie. And for making of that movie, because Bob and I were together at the time, and Barry was a huge inspiration to me as far as somebody who spoke up for those who had been mistreated. And basically, long and short of it, great comedian, died not long before we started making Darlin, and he had been raped multiple times when he was when he was 5 years old by his babysitter's boyfriend. And he came out with his story on stage one night when he just, out of nowhere, he just started talking about it as a comedian, which you can imagine the audience that night. And he fought very, very long and hard in order to get pedophiles on the internet who were sharing files on AOL in the internet's infancy, to ensure that AOL did what they needed to do, what they were fully aware of what was happening, and they were making a fortune out of, because the files were so huge to download that they were making a lot of money off these files of children being shared online. And so that's why he's thanked in there. But there was a point to it. Oh yes, so he was telling me about a friend of his, a kid he was in choir with when he was part of the church. And this little boy had been told by his priest, as the priest was forcing him to give him oral sex, that it was the body of Christ that he was eating, that he was taking, that he was ingesting. The semen was the body of Christ.
There's a story like that in the movie too, I think in the documentary.
He talks about it in the documentary, yeah. And that just struck me, obviously it's such a visceral thing to,
it makes you want to jam a flagpole into somebody's chest.
It really does. It really does. But just that kind of manipulation, and that use of this beautiful faith and trust, and converting religious ideology into something that.
Or like when Darlin's reading that passage from the Bible or whatever for the first time, she's, do you know what it means? What you just read? She's just like,
It doesn't make any sense. So that was also some influence on that, sort of hearing from real stories of people who've been abused in that way.
Sure, okay,